Okay. Okay. The mind is proof there's more. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode. I'm going to dive into it. I want to speak about our relationship with existence and our relationship with reality, and how there comes at times certain hidden angles. You see, it's as if our body seems to be in, like, imagine, like, this is as a metaphor. Imagine like the second dimension. The mind is like in the third dimension. Therefore, the mind has a sort of cubic reality with extra additional dimensions than what the body can perceive. The mind is proof there is more. Because if movement is intelligence, and if the movement of our intelligence cannot be pinpointed to a location, in some sense it means there is a sort of, either our intelligence cannot interpret greater locations, greater dimensional frameworks, or in some sense there is no greater dimensional framework. What that means is, there was the story of the flatlands, and how the flatlanders, and the Flatlanders was the society of two-dimensional beings. Its members included triangles, circles, and squares. And one day, out of nowhere, suddenly a square appears, and out of nowhere in this 2D dimension. And in all the Flatlanders are like, whoa, what is this? How did this square teleport out of nowhere? How did this miracle happen? And from the third dimension, you can see somebody put a cube on the surface of this flatland. Higher dimensional explanations, in which if we were in those dimensions, we wouldn't need the explanations. So a two-dimensional question, if its answer is three-dimensional, the two-dimensional question had access to a very limited percentage of what the actual situation was. So a sort of playing around with dimensions, I would say. What has the mind of man done? When we look at people, and if you were to go on the street and ask the average man, why do you have a mind? What is that mind there for? The mind is alive. And because we consider ourselves life forms, the mind seems to animate the body. Now, the human being, in its attempt to comprehend its environment, classified objectivity, and has classified objectivity's relationship with subjectivity. What does that mean? I'm a person who, in these talks, I say, if any person who looks in their moment of being, it's universal, it's everywhere. So what I mean by that is that any person who looks at their moment, if you were to really look at like a scientist at your moment, you would notice, okay, I see the objective, I see I'm a body. But when you see there is a view upon this body, that the sophistication of our intelligence transcends mere animal. Now, either something happened in our evolution, or we were never from here, or the seeds of life were planted on this earth from elsewhere. Because we notice many philosophers have seen the difference between the Eastern mentality. The kind of Western mentality is things must be created. The Eastern mentality, things are growing. And when you have the mentality of growth, it becomes easier for you to become disciplined. When you're growing into life, rather than you have to create a life to be. You know. So this difference between making and growing has to do with the context. And pretty much, I classify existence and what the intelligence that is animate in existence in ways where it's very simple. Actually, I thought it's like I should be able to explain it in a way where if I had a time machine and I went back to myself when I was really young, I could explain it then. And it's very easy. Life is not just known phenomena. There is a relationship between the known and the unknown. The known cannot exist without the unknown. If all of this universe was known, there would be no expansion. Why would you, do you know what I mean? There would be no evolution. It seems that what is catalyzing evolution is the unknown potential. Kind of, if you think of the life of people in history to be an action, that action was inspired out of a potential. So it's kind of like we're being catapulted from our inner realms into an outer intelligent subject that's objectified. So, if in the moment there's an objective component and there is an ambiguous, kind of vague and subtle subjective component to it, it's as if I find that uh, how can I tell you? It's like for certain people, it's easy to diminish the idea and the concept of the soul, but it's as if let me tell you, it's like if we choose to see ourselves as meaningless atoms in space, there is no telling why we shouldn't see ourselves as meaningless thoughts hovering in space. So that means rather than me perceiving a sort of intelligence pattern, a sort of linearity to thought, it's as if time is not, who says time is linear? Imagine we go into this mindset where time is happening, where it's like, how can I tell you? Imagine like for your body, time is going from the past to the future. For your mind, it's going from the future back into the past, imagine. Because the mind requires its reverse. That means the more linearized, that means the more you see time as linear and you think you're going forward in time, the more your subconscious is, in order to keep that linearity, choosing to go back in time. Which is a very crazy concept, which means everything that has been engineered simultaneously, the reverse engineering of it has been dictated in the moment of the engineering. So the codependence, so it's kind of like moving from a relationship of just void with the singular to a relationship of the singular with the void and then the singular with the dualistic. And once we really got into the dualistic, like 2020, human beings have access to the pretty much three dimensions of perception. The fourth perception, which is infinity, I say, the fourth kind of dimension, that infinity will only emerge when you can see the two dimension and the first dimension in the void. So let me tell you, so many people are trying to fulfill their lives, but they can only fulfill it based on the emptiness they see. So what that means is your beliefs on who you are as a being is a certain room. And or let me say it like this, who you are as a being is a certain room and your beliefs are the furniture in this room. And so you can choose to keep the furniture in there, but in order to bring new furniture, it's very obvious, common sense. You got to take the furniture out. Now, what we find is that many people around the world in their youth, they're being conditioned in certain environments. A lot of human dimension has to do with how communication is being animate. That means intelligence is something that is different when it comes to external conditions and internal conditions. In your inner realms, a person can be free. You can have a very young child who is silent in the crowd. It's the parents are like, why is this kid so quiet? And then you can see behind that kid's eyes, the world is moving loudly. The world is speaking loudly. What does that mean? That means it is a relationship with how we are in stuff and how we are all of it. And that's the beauty of the mind. That's the glory of the mind. That your mind is an opportunity for you to see things. That means if a person didn't have a brain, just eyes, would that be enough for perception to occur? We see no. We see it's an interrelationship. It's as if my heart is working alongside my lungs. My brain is working alongside, uh, for example, my stomach. So what I mean by this is that it's animate, it's integrative, and it can even be void, and even it on till the infinite. But in the middle of life's games, there will come a moment for every being where they will see all the objects and subjects ever known to their mind standing in one place, standing under one sky. And that's when the infinite unknown finds you. When you have found as a being contentment with the finite. When you no longer fear what is, you can do anything. And I'm not saying this in regards to a cultural program. I mean, civilization, of course, it's elegance. For me, civilization, it's strange. I feel it's like I have to take care of the civilization of the species like a family member. It's like you can't just let a 4 billion-year-old science project go become inefficient just because people want to get distracted by their inner realms. If we really look at what's going on the planet from the moment the doctor slaps you on the back and your lungs open up. Self obsession. We are obsessed with ourselves because if we do not survive, if we don't maintain this self, then there is no world. And sometimes it's kind of a strange thing, I thought about it and then I was like, all right, it makes sense. That the jealous person, all those people who, for example, have, it's like hatred is a more advanced intelligent state than emptiness. Any sort of animate thing, regardless of its context, is more intelligent. That means you can see this whole life as just stillness and movement. You can see knowledge as movement, as how there is a movement, and this movement interpreted itself. And so, just like the caveman sparked fire, that discovery came to him, we spark language, and we've been living in it since. And so this mass linguistics simulation, I felt it was something at first. I mean, I felt it. I didn't act on it, but it was like in my youth, I felt there was an illusion. But then I realized the illusion is the greatest lie. The fact that people are feeling their experience is not direct of their moment, of their truth. You see, what if energy could talk and we could ask it a question? If you ask energy, hey, energy, what's your truth? Energy would just be energy. For me, it's as if the mind is an engine that can sync the inner realms with the outer realms and therefore bring forth. It's an engine for divinity. It is an engine for a relationship of the known with the unknown and the unknown with the known. Anybody who hears the sentence I'm saying, in your life, realistically and practically, you as a person, if you see anything and wonder about what is the known moving the unknown, defining the unknown, or is the unknown defining the known? And it's kind of a trend that most human beings that get to pulled towards unknown experiences, that means they care not for per se just the ideological constitution of the cosmos behind their eyes. They care for the actual living experience. It's like the life has a greater sign than the form, for the life form. The form is the opportunity, the life is the free will. Human beings are not all meant to look through the same eyes. On some level, we never can. Therefore, the fact that civilization has continued and we have agreements for me was like, whoa, how can 8 billion different beings with different eyes live together? And then I realized because they want to think of it this way, people get activated when their free will is authorized to be a result in the thing in the world. What does that mean? That means you're an existential creature. You're experiencing life moment to moment, and as you're experiencing life to moment, various ways the world is held. As if imagine the world is like a cup and there's liquid, there's like coffee in that cup, and the person is running upstairs. He has to run upstairs. He also wants to take the coffee. He's risking the multitasking. You know, this is why people who are risk takers, they find themselves, I'm telling you, it's like they're great multitaskers. Because you got to attempt. Many times you got to test your own mind. And how you test it is by attaining a sort of honesty and acceptance of your most simplest self. If you have not accepted how you can be a simple being, I am telling you, you will be sold on the complexity. That means people, the fact that these belief systems have gotten out of control, they are out of control because they blindfold the person. That means for me, I knew that when I'm giving these talks, people in the world are going to hear it. Okay, because I'm talking. Like if somebody put raise the volume of music, people passing by would hear it. you know and so I feel that language is a simulation, is a known simulation in an unknown reality, rather than a known reality in an unknown simulation. I feel that our attention is something to consider as an important chess piece in life. That means really you as a human being, based on your energy levels in the moment, you consider things. And so life, I noticed very early on, you won't feel alive here on this in this plane of existence unless you realize the opportunity of the void to be something. That means anytime you have a sort of mentality that you like, let me tell you, it's like higher dimensions, there's no reward. I find in other states of being, uh, there's no reward system. They're non-dual. They're just pure experience oriented. It's as if experiencing a sight, as if right now you think it, like, let's say playfully, if you think you are a soul in this moment, let's say you're a Vedic guy. Let's say you consider there's a soul to the soul, correct? So it's as if like this soul in this moment is oscillating between matter and consciousness. The beautiful thing about life is that the unknown can never die. That the meaning in our lives is not that we should know it. And often the person who plants a tree just because he felt it was the right thing to do, just because he felt it's necessary. The person planted a tree and never got to see how far that tree grew and what kind of shade it provided for what kind of civilizations. But the action has value. Life is a opportunity of a lifetime. It's honestly like a performance of a lifetime. That means I realized it's like we have no choice but to be characters of our own conception, when reality is not just external going towards the internal, it's internal going towards the external. It's dynamic. That's the thing. We're waking up from thinking life is a photograph to realizing it's a living film. And in that living film, there requires trust of what the system can be. That means even though you may there has been times in my life where I've seen um, just messed up stuff happen, like outside in the street. And when I saw that messed up thing happen, I had seen the devouring of one person's inner realm of another's outer realm. And that brought tears to my eyes. It brought tears to my eyes because reality is you have to be alert physically and you got to be attentive mentally. That means it's like the proper way for communication to occur, I think. I would say this, that the advanced communicator does not assume they know the other. For me, it's like there was a time where I was like, I want to know, I want to know, I want to know. I had this kind of urge, this urge to just know more. Because it's like as if I remember in my youth looking at people in gatherings and I'm like, what do people value? You know? And then I realized, whoa, we're all on a rock in the middle of nowhere. Nobody knows anything. And I was like, okay, that was the sort of inner authorization. The fact that the unknown kept potentials of knowledge. That if we are to be an advanced civilization, at least our attention must be on it. The world we live in and the worlds that live in us. The body that is temporary, but the mind that stares at the eternal. Really, if you define the person as an individual, kind of temporary object, I mean, what else can the person do? Evolution will be an eternal effort. I'm like, oh my God, is like evolution kind of a creature scared of the void? Like a counter response? This world is an incredible place, mainly because of the way it is placed. We find ourselves orbiting a star. Stars can potentially, like, theoretically, kind of even turn into black holes, which within them there's countless stars. So for me, it's like I'm like, what is this? Is emptiness a mirror? That means only we think there's emptiness, or is emptiness a door? And my main consideration is that emptiness is a door. That means the mind is a movement, and the moment the attention doesn't identify with that movement, it becomes the space. So the less you move as a human being, the more your attention is being the whole moment. The moment you move, the moment you there is movement and noise, then you go into the dualistic dimension. That means if I was like kind of like I had a busy day and then I found like a moment and throughout the day to just go see a park or somewhere, sit like simply on the grass or somewhere and just close my eyes for a second and just breathe. In that moment, I would for a second be like pausing that video game of the day and just taking in what happened. And this is something that it's kind of like I must bring back that, guys, I am telling you, we were creatures that had a very intimate relationship with the ecosystem. But then after some point, when we stepped out of the food chain, there was no longer a relationship, or it's as if the nature wasn't moving our imagination anymore. So we became responsible for our environments. And that's the difference. This is why when people go and live in forests or something, it's as if there's less responsibility because nature is doing more of the work. But when you come into cities and civilization, that means full responsibility. That means it's as if like I would say to think that life is even a nihilistic viewpoint at that point would be efficient for a busy civilization. And I find it fascinating. It's like it's all about where the attention of the cultural program is. That means any room you go in, wonder where is the attention. I say to people, don't just, like want attention. Study it. Study its movement like it's a wild animal. It's fascinating to see how that ego, like, you know, dives. Life is an advanced movement. It is a movement that is a relationship between objects being observed and the observer. And here's the cool thing, that when you look at, like in front of you, the other people appear to you as objects. But when you like close your eyes and try to look at yourself, you see it's as if like you're a subject. But then you're like, how does this subject change? That means it's like, think of it this way. It's like the same way we can't say we have the same human body as we did 10 years ago. It's like the same way of saying we don't have the same thoughts as 10 years ago, the same subjective sense of self. So if we don't have the same subjective sense of self, that means objects and subjects are moving within the presence of an intelligent observer. That intelligent observer in mysticism, they saw it as the pearl of the observer. That means that you see, think of it this way. Instead of thinking you're just pure matter, just calm down on choosing one side of the game of duality, and just for a moment try to look at life like a designer. A designer doesn't want to extract an emotional narrative, from the phenomenon. The designer is looking at the design, looking at shape. And you see, looking at design, it's one of the purest actions. Looking is a pure action. Observance is something that the moment the person becomes observant of their environment, understands that their mind is in the room of the moment too, and the mind is being the room too. That means when your mind is being the world, that's your inner realms. Uh, there's this really nice Zen story that is a kind of home run in regards to its moral and the theme of this talk. There are two imperial guards, two friends since childhood, and these two friends were made to be like palace guards. So their task was every day to stand guard at the palace. And so every day they're standing there, you know, and what happens is one of them is getting bored and sees there's the flagpole with the banner of the kingdom, with the flag of the kingdom. And he sees the wind is blowing this flag. And for a second, he looks at it and he's like, wait a minute, is the flag moving or the wind? And he sees that without the wind, the flag can't move. So he looks at his friend and he's like, hey man, you see that flag moving there? I think it's the wind moving the flag. The flag is not moving, the wind is moving. And the friend looks at it and says, no way, man. It's like the flag, regardless of the wind, the flag is moving. You can't say it's not moving, you know? You can't say it's just the wind moving, the flag is not moving. So they're in this very kind of incredible, as if like two random people, two palace guards back in the day, found, imagine this incredible kind of existential inquiry, you know? For me, that's very divine moment. They found a glitch in the subjective realm. They noticed a glitch in how language was keeping meaning for them. So in that moment, these two palace guards suddenly get shocked, as if goosebumps, and they're like, "We don't know which is moving." And to their surprise, coincidentally, across there was this road, and from this kind of kingdom, there's this sage who never comes out like from the mountain peaks, like he stays on the mountaintop. He's decided randomly this day he's felt he has to come to town. And so as he's walking by, suddenly from how the person is dressed and how the person is walking, suddenly these two soldiers, for the first time, they let go of their post. And they just for a second quickly run, as if the injury is more fascinating than the outer duty, outer responsibility. And so what happens is they go to this Zen master who's walking by the sage, this very wise person, and they tell him, and one of the imperial gods said, "Kind sir, please help us. It's like one of us thinks it's the wind that's moving, and the other is thinking is the flag. The flag is moving, because the flag is moving, but the wind is moving it. So which is moving?" And the Zen master gives a response that when I first heard this story, I was like, well, nice. The Zen master looks at him and says, "Neither. The mind is moving. Observe." He doesn't say the observe part, but I'm telling you, observe. Observe how your mind is the animative force of reality. Observe how this cosmos, we did not, let's say, create the cosmos, but we created its meaning. We linked the subjects with the objects. And when I noticed this, it was for a second, a part of me was crying when I saw the educational system. Truly beyond its mask. You know what it was? It was nobody knows what to do, so this is what it is. It's as if, sir, this is the problem with having individuals being responsible for collective systems. The issue becomes that the individual cannot possibly update himself. That means, imagine there's a system of government and there's a dictator, okay? And so that dictator is running things. He's saying what's okay, what's not okay, okay? Is governing the whole nation. But that dictator also has the brain of a person. And the person cannot be so up to date to be able to see all angles for all people. That means even the concept of a majority choosing a singular person, for me, it's at the end of the day, if it's a person, it's too individual, too narrow the amount of data that person can possibly have access to. So what does that mean? That means rather than institutionalizing a lot of stuff, rather than at making individuals kind of be responsible for collective systems, it's kind of like, how can I tell you? It's not a one man job. I really feel it's like its evolution means nothing will remain the same. Nothing. Even the concept of nothing will not remain. The mind is moving. Yet the mind identifies with the void space, which means manifestation without man is nothing. Because we're in the room, reality it can be commented on. So this would mean awareness is a precondition to self. But what is awareness? It's like it's a light in a room. So the mystery of consciousness, I think, inevitably is like, how is this light on? The light of the ingenuity of the free will. You know, it's kind of like language is a sort of artificial intelligence. It is artificial when the language's purpose is to kind of bridge an external image with an inner image. It's as if it's as if really we're standing in two worlds rather than one. I honestly think about it because there's so much attention on individuality, identity. People are drawn towards knowledge to be able to resculpt their individualism. But for me, I was like, okay, so we as a species have had an ability of the mind to feel it is one thing in one moment. Okay, that means you're saying, like, I'm me. So that me is a sense of self in a moment. I think it comes down to just remembering who you are and not disturbing the moment. Think of it this way, that it's kind of like chess when it comes to the known and the unknown. Imagine the known is playing chess with the unknown. If, depending on which side you are, whether you start with the black pieces or the white pieces, Um, if you go with the white pieces, you are making the first move. So pretty much in chess, that means the white pieces, usually the tactic is offensive, offense, you know? So the white is like the invading kingdom, and the black pieces are the kingdom that's defending. Defending. That means it's like the strategy for the black pieces is kind of like defend until the person makes a mistake. So the whole strategy is it's like a sort of effort to attain a sort of perfection. That means I'm saying that when it comes to wisdom, you're letting the unknown make the first move. So you're not chasing it. And when you let the unknown make the move, that means it's not about like the person. Like life is not. Truth is important, but it's not so important that the person has to think about it 24/7. I say life is something you got to pilot through, and you're pretty much piloting through different kind of brain chemistry and different states of mind, really. That means I feel no two states of mind the same. So what's really cool is not only nobody has your eyes, nobody is your clone. In other words, nobody has your eyes, meaning that nobody can comprehend the full scope of what your mind has access to. So that means there was a time I thought I could judge people, and it was ridiculous. Like I felt I could just see someone and very easily judge them. And then I realized, what am I judging though? And then I noticed it's a very tiny percentage of what tip of the iceberg of that person's I've seen. So when you discover the unknown within yourself, you will also become tolerant of the unknown within others. You will understand that it's okay for the unknown to be here. That's when you stop searching, you stop being a truth addict. It's kind of like we see what's here first, then respond to it. And when we see what's here first, it's a collision of all the patterns our intelligence has, like the person's intelligence, the individual's intelligence has contained, and it's a response. So I kind of see like my mind to be a clay that is made of a coagulation of all the sensory images I have received as a being, and everything that happens in the moment, let's say whether I have a conversation or it's like a physical exercise or whatever, it's like it sculpts my inner realm. It influences. It's as if like life is if you're not comfortable change, then it's as if you haven't understood nature yet. Nature is doesn't have morality the same way man does. That means a lion doesn't look at a gazelle when it's hungry and it's like, this gazelle is innocent. Like the lion doesn't think about the innocence of the gazelle. The lion doesn't see the bigger picture, but our species somehow could. So if you could say like the evolution of the Homo sapien compared to other species, the other species saw a species become an alien. Do you know? So that means we suddenly looked at the environment and we saw ridiculously way more than other species. Now, one has to conclude, of course, that intelligence could be a field. So I'm speaking about it in a particular way, but it could totally not be from a certain particle, the intelligence of it. That means when I remember throwing a leaf in a stream and in a river, and the I noticed that the leaf is taken by the river. Literally, the soul of the leaf, how the leaf was moving in that moment, was the river moving that object. So it was the river was the soul, and I thought, whoa, could it be that my body is like a leaf and my mind is like a river? And the moment I become aware of it, it's as if my mind is already moving with direction prior. So it becomes a sort of strange velocity of living where the direction is already there. Because ultimately, the grasp and access to data in the moment is instantaneous. Come to a recognition that there's an instantaneous observer in the moment. When I say instantaneous, that means it's not, it has no separation. It's like the intersection, oh man. Imagine an x and y axis and the central point. That point is not in time. Do you know what I mean? It's the zero of all. From nothing, there came a point. That point automatically became the center of all space. That means there came the existence of a central position. This central position was as fascinating as drawing an axis or considering an axiomatic perception. That means you hold a belief in a certain, the belief holds your perception at a certain axis. If you, it's like, what would a person do if they realized that before they learned their language, they were a site in existence, and before they were a site in existence, they were the existence of experience as space. So right now, our civilization is as advanced. Is well, let's say we're not advanced. I don't consider our civilization to be advanced now, but it's moving at least that way. As an advanced civilization doesn't mean just technological advancement. It means the advancement of the inner technologies as well. That means we don't want just the technologies evolving without the user of technology evolving. If one wants to wonder what percentage of what happens to them throughout the day is internal phenomenology and external phenomenology, I think people would be fascinated. Fascinated that emotions are really personal. That means it's like I can share, for example, words. I can use language to share the kind of river of thoughts behind my eyes. But I could tell you that emotions can't be communicated. Only maybe through the tone and through a certain, I would say, kind of one of those apocalyptic narratives. You see, it's like the death of the world of language is a subjective apocalypse. That means if we were able to see the physical body and say, oh, at some point it's not going to be here. So we look at our subjective bodies and we're like, whoa, at some point they could also not be here. And then we wonder what remains, and attention is the field it was born into. I come from my own school of thought where it was savage because I how can I tell you, I was raised around traditional spiritualist ideas. But I noticed that there's something mysterious. It's as if before I could just comfortably accept the concept of a soul, I'm like, then what is the mind? It's like what is the how what how it's like I could distinguish between a known phenomena such as my body and sort of like the free will's animation as a sort of subjective, something of the subjective realm, but I could not comprehend the subjectivity of the soul and the subjectivity of the mind. I was like, isn't it just me looking into stuff, looking into thought? That means it's as if the thought doesn't exist until you look at it. Life isn't beautiful until you learn to see it properly. I feel here's the issue. I've sat many nights just thinking, okay, 8 billion beings on a rock. What do they do? What do they do? You know, and what should they do? And I noticed, well, here's the opportunity. We can't say life is purely a solo journey because if it was solo, then why, it's like, why would there be others? So the fact that there is existence and the rock, we're not alone on a rock, means that's an advantage. That's a strange blessing. Sometimes the fact that I'm around people, even though I don't communicate much, but like when I'm around people, it's still like the presence of something. you know, a field, you can say, a field of minds. So this sort of traditional mentality of the mind, body, the body, mind, and soul, those trio, they come in a package, guys. The mind, body, and soul come in the same existential package, and I had the traditional idea, okay, mind, body, soul. Then the mind, I was like, what is it? Then I realized all my thinking is in language and images, and I was like, whoa, okay. So if I consider what is here now, I will inevitably conclude that if I am aware of absence, it means there is something that is wandered beyond the thing. So you see, it's like how Frodo went beyond the Shire and he just stopped for a second and looked back at the Shire and he looked past that line and he's like, okay, we're doing this. We're going to live in the life, not just exist in it. Because really, a lot of people have potential. A lot of people are able. What they lack is direction. And some people they have a lot of direction, but they lack the speed. And so I was thinking, why is it so? And I realized it's because we are choosing to be individuals in a collective system. We are choosing to identify with a sort of archetypal position that is strangely colored by our material sensory perception. So what I mean is that we have this interpretation that we are evolutionary animals. In the mainstream, we feel we are evolutionary animals, and it's as if somehow an object has evolved into a subject to itself. That means the object is treating itself subjectively. It's treating itself as a part of the moment, not the whole moment. Ultimately, it will come to a trust of the unknown, which you can only access by abidance with your true sense of being. Your true sense of being doesn't mean it's a truth of the personality. Doesn't mean there's a heavenly story that's waiting for you. It means that when you have dared look at the unknown, you have dared see beyond the conditions of how you felt you knew things. So when what you don't know becomes as fascinating to you as what you know, then the fields of the mind open up. That's when you can navigate the subjective realms brilliantly. Because is there, it's like what is beauty? I have often thought that. What is beauty? You know, is beauty a desire? Is beauty something I don't have that I suddenly saw? Is beauty a promise? Is beauty just a mere emotion? Is beauty a sort of it's as if something in the inner realms that I never thought I'd see in front of my eyes, I suddenly saw it. Like what is it? And I realized the human being is so influenced by the environments it has transitioned that really for us to identify in language no longer has the purity of the presence of the unknown. That means this is how you know a person is depressed. If they don't trust the unknown, if they feel the unknown is something to fear, guess what? Your mind is so you can infinitize that fear. What does that mean? That means you can take a subject and just by having an unconscious emotion, like if you're not conscious of it, your emotions can animate your subjective realms instantly, evocationally, and in powerful ways. What does that mean? Imagine a person. I've said this story before in other talks. Like imagine a person got fired. The person is coming back in the bus stop, and in the bus stop, as he's waiting, he's just looking at the sky and he's like, I'm done. As if he feels he's a person he can't have any other effort. He failed. It's the ultimate failure, the failure that doesn't try again. That's actually when true failure. This person is there in that chaotic moment, not realizing his wife has won the lottery. And so in that moment, it's as if his inner realms have let go of caring for the outer, only for him to go home and realize he never needs to work again. And now he can live the actual life. And this is why I'm saying civilization is so ridiculously designed. It's as if like by making nations, and I have nothing against nationalism in the sense that it was so important in the development of language, which is a huge intertechnology, of many dialects suddenly becoming singular languages. Proto languages becoming like singular languages. So I'm just saying that it's as if it's one earth, it's one rock. We've made walls around it and territories, and rather than realizing if the whole room was everyone's, resource allocation could be perfect. That means we would get rid of the resource problem of human beings' physical life. When the problem of their physical resources is satisfied, they can start living as minds on this planet, you know? That means I thought about it and I'm like, okay, there's an opportunity cost here. If we choose to not create, for example, in the future, they say that like, I don't know, like 20 years, a wave of automation will hit us in a way where so many labor jobs, people won't have anything to do because it's easier for robots to do them. So when it comes to that point, what happens? The creature has to decide to be more of a mental being than just a pure physical being. Now, what does that mean? That means now movement and the expansion of vision in the inner realms has become more important than just expansion of the outer realm. So ultimately, I would think that it's like we create a healthy, peaceful civilization that doesn't have nations, because all nations can act as sub nations of a greater nation. That greater nation is the decision making of maker of the resources. So it doesn't make sense, guys, that we have nations and borders, yet if somehow we were all like 8 billion united human beings, we wouldn't have this resource battle. There would literally be no wars because there would be no separate groups. So how would we have different people in different cultures where for a long time in history have developed in separate ways unite? Only through the context. Their concepts will never unite, but through the context. What does that mean? That means if two nations were at war, suddenly an alien species attacks the Earth, and they're like, okay, now we both have to fight for the same context. And really, it's all about the progression of human vision and how it's being concluded. You think you're an object, your whole life, your attention is going to go on subjects. You think you're a subject, your whole attention, your whole life is going to go on objects. You think you're nothing, your attention is going to go on everything. You think you're everything, your attention is going to go on nothing. These are the this is, language by nature is a dualistic program. That means it needs a counter. It needs like them. There's matter and then there's antimatter. And antimatter is just like space wearing a hat. It's the same space but with a different name. I believe it. I think it's an indisputable fact, guys, that the mind is there is an unknown observer observing the movement of the objectivity and the subjectivity. I remember giving a talk in 2015. I think it was titled "In Whose Eyes Are You Living In?" And that who meant to be that title was kind of like implied to for the person to wonder about who they really are, and in its recognition realizing their relationship with various collective systems. So that means it's like just Sri Ramana Maharshi, he said meditation is your true nature, and he said the greatest service one can render the world is their own self-realization. And it's this notion that when you wonder about what the self is, you see its codependence with others. So suddenly various social frameworks are comprehended. And then what really is knowledge is how human beings, as their eyes have opened, their actions have moved things. So for me, it's kind of like history on some level is a mirage, on another level, it is the architecture of where we are now. I feel that we cannot know there is matter without something that is not matter. Matter is a concept of a dualistic nature. So that means it's like you can't have the chicken without the egg. They must be simultaneous. You see? So there was a simultaneous birth of a dualistic kind of mode. So, everyone who's tuning in right now, um, I'm going to go into a certain part of this segment that's called a quote tunnel. And I'm going to, in other words, uh, read a bunch of quotes from people, either a theme in history or a certain person. I've decided for tonight to go into a quote tunnel of what the word mind. And pretty much what I mean by that is like the theme is the mind, so I'm kind of the quote tunnel is a way of seeing how other people in history potentially how their mind through language it showed us how they looked at things. For me, the reason philosophy and history and all this stuff became fascinating is because I'm like, whoa, how are people looking at things? You know. So in this quote tunnel, let us see how much we can see from um, the linguistic eyes of these people. I'm going to read their quotes, anyways. William Shakespeare. Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind, and therefore is winged Cupid painted blind. Holy shit. Wow. And therefore is winged Cupid painted blind. Aristotle tells us you will never do anything in this world without courage. It is the greatest quality of the mind next to honor. So we can say honor is the older brother of courage. Buddha says, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. Buddha also says we are shaped by our thoughts. We become what we think. When the mind is pure, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves. That means it becomes a consequence of being in sync with the rhythms of nature. Buddha also says to keep the body in good health is a duty. Otherwise, we shall not be able to keep our mind strong and clear. That means eat your vegetables, future generations. Vincent van Gogh says, I put my heart and my soul into my work and have lost my mind in the process. Wow. Guys, what Vincent van Gogh is tapping into is a very high speed subjective realm. There is a point that I've noticed, like I've only been able to ground myself to it through humor. But it's as if like sometimes when you have it, and it's like when a very dynamic river of thought moving at a very high speed, so suddenly an egoic construct enters that plane, it will immediately get dismantled. That means the test of the genius for the inner realm is to, after being overwhelmed, what to do with it. Do you know? And that's the thing of how to kind of place an inner secret in the fact of the objective truth. So the mystery component, the unknown component to the moment. The fact that we instantly say, like, even like it's as if it's the same, the humility, whether the person is a theist and atheist. You know? The same humility is like, we know there is nothing. Not that we know there's nothing, we don't know that if this is everything. So the unknown is in every human being. The unknown comes across as the unconscious mind, as the collective unconscious, as Carl Jung would say. So, anyways, let's. I'm gonna go back into the quote. Rosa Parks says, "I have learned over the years that when one's mind is made up, this diminishes fear. Knowing what must be done does away." And knowing what must be done, guys, I feel that's another way of saying natural vision, the vision of your own nature. Mary Wollstonecraft says, strengthen the female mind by enlarging it, and there will be an end to blind obedience. Yeah, guys, I mean, blind obedience is something where I consider, another way I speak about that is I say it's language worship. I say we were people were worshiping objects and they slapped those idols out of our hand and we went what did we go to worshiping next? Language. And we've been worshiping language ever since till now. Our civilization is built on us worshiping language, being thoughts. The moment we defined matter as particles, we became particular people in a society. The intelligence was suddenly administered to individualism first. Mary Wollstonecraft also says slavery to monarchs and ministers, which the world will be long freeing itself from, and whose deadly grasp stops the progress of the human mind, is not yet abolished. I mean, guys, the mind is so advanced, there can always be a greater evil, and you can also see a greater good. That means you can see the villain and the superhero and endlessly see them update till the end of time. You know, that means if Hollywood really decides, they can endlessly till the end of time just make Hollywood movies. Make hero movies. Movies that have the archetype of the hero and the anti-hero. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, for every minute you remain angry, you give up 60 seconds of peace of mind. Marcus Aurelius says, Nothing has such power to broaden the mind as the ability to investigate systematically and truly all that comes under thy observation in life. Yeah, and that systematic part is free will. If you don't realize that free will, you still want the world to move your inner realms. When you become responsible for your inner realms, that's the most advanced position of nature, to be aware of itself, in other words. Friedrich Nietzsche says, our treasure lies in the beehive of our knowledge. We are perpetually on the way thither, being by nature winged insects and honey gatherers of the mind. Carl Jung would probably read this and say, we are conscious explorers of the unconscious, collective unconscious. Aristotle says, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Thomas Aquinas says, justice is a certain rectitude of mind, whereby a man does what he ought to do in the circumstances confronting him. Yeah, that means trusting your will, trusting that animate. It's like if you looked at the moment, okay, what is alive here, and you realize it's you. It's like trusting that you, but not just trusting it in certain components of it, the whole thing. Henry David Thoreau says, a fool can make a rule, and any fool will mind it. Plato says, knowledge which is acquired under compulsion obtains no hold on the mind. Yeah, that means this is also important in the educational system. Rather than accessing the most vibrant state of mind, it's as if it's as if, how can I tell you, not everyone drives the same. And to create an educational system that only values a certain way of driving, a certain speed of driving, is, I think, for me, inefficient when I look at it. But anyways, Khalil Gibran says your living is determined not so much by what life brings to you as by the attitude you bring to life. Not so much by what happens to you as by the way your mind looks at what happens. St. Augustine says, my mind withdrew its thoughts from experience, extracting itself from the contradictory throng of sensuous images, that it might find out what that light was wherein it was bathed. And thus, with the flash of one hurried glance, it attained to the vision of that which is. That, you know what that means? That means in the mystical experience, the individual archetype is becoming transparent. It's fading. It's like evaporating. So individual consciousness is realizing it was never an individual, yet the individuality was kept. And most of the it's like at that point it would be kind of trying to give an archetype to a field of intelligence. It's like impractical. Leonardo da Vinci. The mind of the painter must resemble a mirror, which always takes the color of the object it reflects and is completely occupied by the images of as many objects as are in front of it. That means it's like kind of like how the Patanjali Yoga Sutra said. Imagine it's like an orb. It takes the orb moving on the colored surface, takes the color of the surface. So Da Vinci is kind of saying, realize how your mind is being what you want to draw. Da Vinci says iron rusts from disuse, water loses its purity from stagnation. Even so does inaction sap the vigor of the mind. Leonardo da Vinci says knowledge of the past and of the places of the earth is the ornament and food of the mind of man. Stephen Hawking says, in my opinion, there's no aspect of reality beyond the reach of the human mind. William Blake says, the man who never in his mind and thoughts travel to heaven is no artist. Galileo Galilei Galileo Galilei. Sorry guys, I can't do this, you know. Gigi says, "Who would set a limit to the mind of man? Who would dare assert that we know all there is to be known?" John Steinbeck, "These words dropped into my childish mind as if you should accidentally drop a ring into a deep well. I did not think of them much at the time, but there came a day in my life when the ring was fished out of the well, good as new. There are things which a man is afraid to tell, even to himself, and every decent man has a number of such things stored away in his mind." Fyodor Dostoevsky. So he says there are things which a man is afraid to tell even to himself. Yeah, the unknown is not confronted by the personal realm. That could be a possibility. And every decent man has a number of such things stored away in his mind. So what does that mean? That means by not confronting a fear, you have made a secret. You have made a parallel potential a secret. I don't know how to say it. But decency is true intelligence. Ozzy Osbourne, "Of all the things I've lost, I miss my mind most." George Santayana, "The wisest mind has something yet to learn." Brian Tracy says, "The key to success is to focus our conscious mind on things we desire, not things we fear." Plutarch says, "In words are seen the state of mind and character and disposition of the speaker." Exactly, the sequencing of words, guys. Like I'm telling you, how a human being evokes image says a lot about what they see. Um, John Milton says, "The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven." Elizabeth C. Stanton says, "The strongest reason for giving all the opportunities for higher education for the full development of her faculties, her forces of mind and body, is the solitude and personal responsibility of her own individual life." Ezra Taft Benson says, "To lose yourself in the righteous service to others can lift your sights and get your mind off personal problems, or at least put them in proper focus." Hugh Jackman says, "Meditation is all about the pursuit of nothingness. It's like the ultimate rest. It's better than the best sleep you've ever had. It's a quieting of the mind. It sharpens everything, especially your appreciation of your surroundings. It keeps life fresh." So if Hugh Jackman is, I believe he's Wolverine. So if he is able to be like the rough mentality of uh, Wolverine, he's probably balancing it with an internal stillness and silence, which makes a lot of sense. That I think great acting occurs when the actor is comfortable with stillness and silence and does not fear. That means like a true actor shouldn't be caring about the camera, should be trying to bring about the greater performance. Do you know what I mean? But anyways, guys, let's keep going. Bernard Baruch, "Be who you are and say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind." Daniel Dennett says, "The mind is the effect, not the cause." Oh, that's how is the concept of effect there if it's not the cause? How is the concept of being able to even consider an effect there? So if you, it's kind of saying if we are the effect of, and so that's kind of saying like, um, I think it's you can see it the other way the moment you see it in one way. It's just a dualistic nature. That means you can see the same sentence. The mind is the cause, not the effect. You know, that means this man's shadow self could be saying that sentence. You know, so the mind is the cause, not the effect, rather than the mind is the effect, not the cause. I mean, it's an interesting statement. Language has architecture regardless. That means there's something cool about communication that hopefully our species establishes it, that it is not only okay to communicate, But once people actually care for other people's mind, as if it's not just, what do you call it? It's not just the street artist performing in the street. It's every person's mind in the street. The moment they communicate, speak, or whatever, however way they're animate, that's a sort of flow of an expression of communication. Abraham Lincoln says some single mind must be master. Some single mind must be master, else there will be no agreement in anything. Yeah, that means there needs to be in this chaos a sort of static point to consider. Um, Benjamin Franklin says a house is not a home unless it contains food and fire for the mind as well as the body. I think I think Benjamin Franklin would definitely go on the Martha Stewart show if he was alive. Yeah. Benjamin Franklin says games lubricate the body and the mind. Okay. Um, Albert Einstein. Well, let's get into this. I'll read one more quote from Benjamin Franklin. He says, "So convenient to think it is to be a reasonable creature, since it enables one to find or make a reason for everything one has a mind to do." Albert Einstein says, "I believe that a simple and unassuming manner of life is best for everyone, best both for the body and the mind." Albert Einstein says it stands to the everlasting credit of science that by acting on the human mind it has overcome man's insecurity before himself and before nature. Albert Einstein says my religion consists of a humble admiration of the illimitable superior spirit who reveals himself in the sight details we're able to perceive with our frail and feeble mind. So it's kind of like how known phenomena is an unknown mind. And because we are limited in our perception of it. Um, I mean, that's one way, I guess you can see it. Albert Einstein says, there comes a time when the mind takes a higher plane of knowledge but can never prove how it got there. William Shakespeare says, mind your speech a little lest you should mar your fortunes. Mind your speech a little lest you should mar your fortunes. Yeah, that's one of those quotes I can't touch, you know. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. William Shakespeare says, suspicion always haunts the guilty mind. Shakespeare says, I like not fair terms in the villain's mind. Ralph Waldo Emerson, every mind must make its choice between truth and repose. It cannot have both. Emerson says, a chief event of life is to have encountered a mind that startled us. Maya Angelou says the need for change bulldozed the road down the center of my mind. Maya Angelou says, like a painter runs her fingers over the keys, I'll search my mind for what to say. Oh, sorry, like a pianist runs her fingers over the keys, I'll search my mind for what to say. Now, the poem may want you to write it, and then sometimes you see a situation and think, I'd like to write about that. Those are two different ways of being approached by a poem or approaching a poem. This being approached by a poem is true testament of uh, the fields of genius. That means it's as if, like, you can say, if the person considers an objective self and a subjective self, the objective self has fear of the conditions changing. The subjective self has fear of the unconditional ability no longer being unconditional. That means your body fears nothingness and your mind fears the absence of will. Now, it is a grand mystery to wonder about the absence of will, but it's also, how can I say it? It's like By the way, guys, I'm going to finish with this quote tunnel. I think I'm going to read here. I'll read one more quote and then I'll take the talk elsewhere. Friedrich Nietzsche says, when 100 men stand together, each of them loses his mind and gets another one. Okay, that's enough with another one. Marcus Aurelius, death is a release from the impressions of the senses and from desires that make us their puppets, and from the vagaries of the mind and from the hard service of the flesh. Wow. Yeah, guys, it's like it's like if freedom being interpreted as a conditional outcome or a sort of unconditional thing. Marcus Aurelius says, "Let your mind run on what you lack as much as on what you have already." Marcus Aurelius says, such as are your habitual thoughts, such also will be the character of your mind, for the soul is dyed by the thoughts." Aristotle says suffering becomes beautiful when anyone bears great calamities with cheerfulness, not through insensibility, but through greatness of mind. And Aristotle says law is mind without reason. Aristotle says, but if nothing but soul or in soul mind is qualified to count, it is impossible for there to be time unless there is soul, but only that of which time is an attribute. Example, if charge can exist without a soul, if change can exist without soul. I don't know if this is really Aristotle. Doesn't sound like the Aristotle I know. Aristotle says inferiors revolt in order that they may be equal, and equals that they may be superior. Such is the state of mind which creates revolutions. Mahatma Gandhi says, you can chain me, you can torture me, you can even destroy this body, but you will never imprison my mind. Mahatma Gandhi says a vow is a purely religious act which cannot be taken in a fit of passion. It can be taken only with a mind purified and composed and with God as witness. Mahatma Gandhi says culture of the mind must be subservient to the heart, which means rather than we create a civilization and the cultural program needs to follow the direct experience first, then the language and the indirect subjectification of it. Voltaire says, it is one of the superstitions of the human mind to have imagined that virginity could be a virtue. Gibran says, Khalil Gibran says, the teacher who is indeed wise does not bid you to enter the house of his wisdom, but rather leads you to the threshold of your mind. Very true. When I look at those people who inspired me, their inspiration was a mirror of my own potential. Khalil Gibran says, to understand the heart and mind of a person, look not at what he has already achieved, but at what he aspires to. And guys, I'll end off with a quote from Albert Camus. Actually, two quotes from Albert Camus. He says, the modern mind is in complete disarray. Knowledge has stretched itself to the point where neither the world nor our intelligence can find any foothold. It's a fact that we are suffering from nihilism. Yeah, that's another way I say it, like in the way where everybody in their subconscious is reacting to emptiness, to non existence. So Albert Camus also says, an intellectual is someone whose mind watches itself. And Horace says, remember when life's path is steep to keep your mind even. Man, these quotes are too good to stop. Like, I'm gonna read like a bit more, guys. Albert Camus says the need to be right is the sign of a vulgar mind. And Da Vinci says he who is fixed to a star does not change his mind. Da Vinci says as every divided kingdom falls, so every mind divided between many studies confounds and saps itself. Guys, this is the secret of the polymath's vision, that the fragmentation of how you're looking at the cause can suggest, like, how would I say it? It's like, rather than the person thinking like they're a painter, they're a musician, they're a mathematician, they're a philosopher, they're all these different branches. They're realizing they are the cause. One, it's like the cause is a point, and the effect is all the angles around that point. The point is the point. You know. Stephen Covey says, begin with the end in mind. Rabindranath Tagore says, a mind all logic is like a knife all blade. It makes the hand bleed that uses it. John Adams tells us, I have accepted a seat in the House of Representatives and thereby have consented to my own ruin, to your ruin, and to the ruin of our children. I give you this warning that you may prepare your mind for. Okay. Okay, let's move past that. um, Sophus, oh my god, I can't even pronounce this guy's name. Sophies says a wise man does not chatter with one whose mind is sick. Um, Neil deGrasse Tyson says, I'm perennially intrigued how people who lead largely evidence based lives can, in a belief based part of their mind, be certain that an invisible divine entity created an entire universe just for us, or that the government is stockpiling space aliens in a secret desert. Frank Lloyd Wright says the heart is the chief feature of a functioning mind. Rene Descartes says, I am indeed amazed when I consider how weak my mind is and how prone to err. So, guys, I'm going to end off with the quote tunnel, but I think what it is like, after seeing all these people kind of talk about mind, I get a sense that it is a relationship with, again, I said, the unknown moving knowledge, or knowledge moving the unknown. When I feel certain as an individual, that's knowledge moving the unknown. That's the inner realms are moving quicker than the outer realms. Therefore, they're defining my outer realms. Therefore, I can own objects. You know, I can claim objects as the self because the inner attention is lively. You know, there was this poet that said, Hafiz, he said, the world is a madhouse. And what he meant that if we choose to judge by a certain pattern, it's impossible to fit everyone in that pattern. That means it's as if like it's impossible to communicate something that at some point as more people listen to it, it will not, it's like there's chaos and order in the same moment. I feel that the mind is like an instrument. A human being can choose to play it and can choose to communicate. I feel that ultimately all of language points to images, and regardless of how we think, how we speak, how thoughts appear to us, how there's subjective symbol attribution to objectivity, it's like there's a dynamism beyond that. Many faces face the world, and the world faces many faces. A singular dimension of perception in a multidimensional system, of course, its continuity will be challenged. The idea is that if our physical existence is temporary, we have like just like conducting a business, you think about the long term and the short term. You know, even a person who thinks about their survival, the access to the future, as Jordan Peterson very interestingly said, we at some point discovered the future, and we as human beings, we were blown by this ability to prepare, this ability to plan ahead. Okay, but in that kind of process of thinking of trying to plan ahead, we separated from our environment. Relationship of the experience with the existence became separated. So we were first just unconscious existence, then we became conscious, and that consciousness was an experience. So what that means is the body evolved on this earth as a separate moving kind of phenomena. Then at some point it became, how can I tell you, um, as the body became conscious of itself, the subjective evolution began. The subjective evolution was like, for the first time, consciousness is like a three-dimensional thing. The body is two-dimensional, right? So the body feels like it's in the mind, right? So if I ask you, who are you? How does this moment have value? How are you even able to judge others when you don't have their eyes? You know, so you see, as a person, there are limits to the inner realms, and language is the only way we can externalize. And you know, I was thinking, what's the best thing that can happen? I called it the multidimensional renaissance, a renaissance where human beings suddenly realize what is behind their eyes has a value to what is in front of it, but they may not understand the value. They may not, it's as if you may, it's like Buckminster Fuller had this mentality where he said, I just make inventions. And they're like, why? And he's like, because one day people will find their utility. You know, that means he didn't have certainty of the end point to even to decide whether he should begin or not. You know, this is the fascinating thing about that. Your decency is your humility to yourself. That means it's like when it's okay for the person To be violent, that means the person has accepted a violent nature. This is the worst thing about suffering, that it can make you hate the world. That hatred must is like an inner flame that must be extinguished, and the only way it can be extinguished is realizing the responsibility of intelligence has to do with your will. So if the concept of freedom is your own interpretation, free will is your own interpretation of movement, you know? Language is not a perfect technology, yet it's the major inner technology we have. The ability that we can speak different languages, we can access different angles of how the world is kept and held. I feel the world is alive also behind our eyes. I feel we have to start speaking about the mind, because it's the grand mystery. It's like, really, what do, if we just take a materialistic perception, what do objects do? What does matter do? What is the purpose of matter hovering, atoms hovering in space? So it's the inevitably it comes down to a sort of empty page, and you realize you're born to write on this empty page. You're born to exist in this system. Now, the system has come more to the individual's choice. That means imagination has become more a personal responsibility, but before it was the responsibility of the environment. That means that before we didn't even have an imagination, it was just like environment being us and we being environment. Then came the distinction between the two. On some level, I feel uh, the uniqueness of every person's DNA is like the center of them. So if you fear, that fear can become chaos. If you think you can be hurt, you know how many ways the mind can hurt itself? That means there's the mind, it's all about the direction of it, and it's about the context. That means it's as if, like, I remember having a friend who was this conspiracy, like he was into conspiracies, and he was going on this mass brainwashing. He even said technology is brainwashing. He felt everything was washing his brain. I'm like, hey man, what are you doing? Is your brain taking a shower? Like, why is it getting washed so much? you know and it and so the thing is that if you choose to see the shadow, you're in the shadow. You can see it as long as you like, but to live in a reality where you feel the inefficiency has more power than the efficiency is foolishness. And the efficiency is really nature. That means we're different. We're kind of like travelers in a world of form. We are travelers made of the periodic table. you know we're attention traveling through the periodic. So for me, it's like, I'm telling you, life is, it can be, you can talk about it in various ways. You can't even consider it. Every object, you look at the object from multiple angles. So does that, and when you look at a subject and you're looking at a subject from one angle, does it mean this angle is false and that angle is true and that angle is false and that angle is true till the end of time? You know? That means the sort of truth claimed by the subconscious that justifies an objective judgment, it's self-generated. That means you feel what you see out of the picture. That means you choose uh, what to look at or what to see about what you look at. And if that choice is ignored, you will go on blaming the world for your own chaos. For me, honestly, guys, I'll tell you, the only intention I have with these talks is to, first of all, have it be a sort of digital notepad, a kind of journal of my mind throughout the days I'm alive. At the same time, it's like there's certain ideas that I feel require to be shared. And the reason is because it's like if you look at the civilization and if the mind of the human being potentially can see a better version, then comes the great philosophical question, what is the answer to the question why? WHY question mark. A question where I feel like um, uh, some people hate, some people love. So the question why, the answer, what is it? And the answer, so many people gave different answers, but the answer was why not? Question mark. And that's the thing. That's the thing. It's kind of the why not an advanced civilization while we're alive? Because inevitably, to any amount of time in the future, we will look like pioneers. So what did we pioneer? You know, that means it's like um, if we cared about freedom, why would we limit it? You know. So, anyways, guys, I hope this talk was helpful. And I apologize for the gaps. Sometimes you guys, it's like when I'm speaking about something, I'm kind of seeing an inner picture, and then I'm translating that inner picture for it to become the sequence of how the ideas appear. So sometimes, guys, you just take it into consideration that it's like it's a rhythm thing, and sometimes I may go off rhythm, you know. But anyways, thanks for tuning in. And have a nice evening, you know, even for some friends from Sydney. Much blessings, guys.